Welcome to the DAKSH Podcast. I'm your host, Surya Prakash. I work with DAKSH, a Bangalore based think tank working on systemic judicial reforms and access to justice. This episode is part of a special video series under our Pathways to Digital Courts initiative. The Pathways to Digital Courts is a collaborative knowledge product bringing together expertise from across sectors, from policy, from litigation, from project implementation and management on making digital courts a reality. We explore what can be done, where it could be done, and how it could be done. eCourts Phase 3 has been launched. This represents a novel opportunity to transform the functioning of the judiciary itself using technology. In these episodes, we explore the journeys of digital transformation in other complex public systems to see what lessons they can offer for the judiciary in its journey. Today, we begin with understanding and learning how the income tax, e-filing and central processing center project transformed the experience for citizens. To discuss this interesting journey, I have with me eminent guests. I have with me Sanjai Verma ji, the first commissioner of the Central Processing Centre and an IRS officer. I have Neelesh Hundekari, leader India AT Kearney. I also have with me Ameya Kunte, who is a tax practitioner. Welcome, sir. Sir, if you could please, all of you gentlemen, if you could please share a brief intro about where you come from and your background, sir.
I'm Sanjai Verma, an IRS officer who retired as member of Central Board of Direct Taxes last year. I'm happy to relive those early days of setting up CPC at Bangalore. I was part of the team that was responsible for setting up this project, Centralized Processing Centre, which was a transformation project in the sense it went on to transform the entire income tax space and the e-filing sector as well as processing of returns and improve citizen experience. And it was the precursor for many other reforms which came later. It formed the backbone for many digital initiatives on which probably we can discuss later. I'm happy to be here.
Neelesh. Hi, I'm a senior partner with Kearney, which is a management consulting firm. I've had the good fortune of being associated with DAKSH on creating a digital or IT strategy for the eCourts project. Judicial reforms is a personal area of interest and passion for me. And I do believe that principles of business process re-engineering, change management, agile organization design, some of those principles can be applied to the judicial processes to make them simple and more efficient. So that's been my association with DAKSH, and it's been a very enjoyable journey. Very happy to be here.
And you have advised large corporations on their digital transformation journeys, and
Yes.
all the learnings from there are relevant to the conversations.
Yeah, that's right. We've done bunch of very large organization transformations.
Pleasure to be here, Surya. I have been a tax professional for last 22 years. Worked in a Big Four consulting firm, then created a tax content portal where it was a combination of a content and technology solution. And now I run a consulting firm again. And I'm extremely passionate about how technology is deployed in different walks of life. And of course, as a user of CPC, there has been an experience over last 15 years. So really happy to be here.
Thank you, Ameya. User perspectives are very important in a conversation on systemic reforms, and I look forward to your insights. As someone who has seen the system evolve over so many years, and as a young chartered accountant learning the ropes, I remember those melas, it was a festive but also a very stressful time for all of us involved in tax compliance. Going out with those files, multiple files of TDS certificates, ATG certificates, all of those things, going to the tax office or those melas, getting them chapat, getting them back, communicating to the client that it is done. So we have moved so far away from that world almost. Today, sitting anywhere in the world, we're able to fill up our tax returns. It goes in, you get an email acknowledgement. Um, 8 crore tax returns were filed last year, and the processing time of tax returns has come down from more than 12 months to a few days. What a dramatic shift in situation. It's not been an easy journey. So we are here to learn how that happened and what that journey means for the transformation of the justice system, which is so vital to democracy and our social well-being. So, sir, if I could ask Sanjay ji, you were the first commissioner of the CPC at Bangalore. Where were you when you first heard of this project? What did you think? What went through your mind when somebody said CPC is happening? What do you think? Do you want to be part of this?
Thank you, Surya. Just to relive those days, I was posted at Bangalore as commissioner in charge. I had just been promoted as a commissioner. I was 44 years of age then, so it's a long way back. And I had been associated with Systems Directorate, which is responsible for these projects for some time. So I knew CPC was in the making. And when I heard that I was posted as the first commissioner, I was happy to be associated because I was involved with the other two main architects of the project, Mr. Harish Kumar and Mr. Ramesh Krishnamurthy, who are the real brains behind this project. And I had been associated with them, and I was happy to be associated with this project. So feeling of excitement built in, the ability to do something. The time has come to probably move on.
So it was not a bolt from the blue. It was in the works. It was brewing before it was informed that you would be posted. So what were the, and I'm going to open this up for Neelesh and Ameya, share your experience or anything that you want to add to this. What were the challenges that you faced in the first few days? Because any new project involves a lot of discussion. There's a lot of heat. What are the things that you guys discussed? Just give us some, insight into those days.
Surya, before I take you to those days, I would like to take you a little back. Right. Because there was a problem brewing in the income tax department.
Yes.
So that was the genesis for this project. We used to receive about 3 crore income tax returns in those days. This is 2005-6 to 2009. But from 2007, a realization had come in that we are not able to process all the income tax returns within the year. Backlog was building up, and there were frustrated taxpayers, frustrated tax officers, because the entire resources of the department were being utilized only for a mundane routine activity, which could be done otherwise. So that was the problem statement, and there was a need to use digital means to find solution to this problem. So that was the origin of this entire exercise. And 2 years were spent from 2007 when the initial go-ahead was received at the highest level, and from 2007 to 2009 February when the contract was signed. So those 2 years were a lot of effort was spent in this. For example, earlier we used to receive returns in paper format. If you recall, you mentioned about melas at Pragati Maidan, at Palace Ground in Bangalore. Taxpayers used to queue and file their income tax returns with annexures. So e-filing had been introduced in 2007. But prior to that, a lot of prior activities had taken place. PAN allotment work was completed by Income Tax Department, so there was an identifier available. Online tax accounting system had been built in for payment of taxes, so that would form backbone. TDS system had been computerized to some extent, so you had tax credits being uploaded through the system. So these 3 prior steps were there, and exercise took place by involving consultants and industry experts to take in stock what could be the best way to go forward. Ultimately, it's not very rocket science to process an income tax return, but why are we stuck with this problem? Why are so much resources? And I may just take you back even a bit. I joined the service in 1989. I remember reading a book, City of Joy. You might remember it came out in 1985. There is a small incident there. One of the priests goes to the customs house in Calcutta to receive a medicine which is probably stuck there. And the way he describes it, like it could belong to 19th century or 18th century. So I was really worried. The income tax offices were stacked with paper. We used to get a lot of these paper returns, and this prime space locked up. Most of the income tax offices are located in prime location. So even our real estate was locked up in holding these paper returns, processing them, and there were all kind of problems associated with not able to process return. So that was the basis from where we come. Ameya probably would know from the user side what was experienced.
Yeah, absolutely. So, three anecdotes, if I could say. My first year of CA articleship, the job was to, on the last day of the due date, to stand in the queue so that somebody will prepare a physical return, will bring them, and my job was to get ahead in the queue so that before 6 p.m., I get a stamp of filing. So that was context one. Then I remember my job and the first online return, the whole anxiety around. Of course, Excel was understood, but utility was not as evolved as it is today. And then you're racing against the 12 midnight clock to make sure that return is digitally uploaded into the system. And fast forward now, I filed my mother's tax return, and by the end of the day, there was a processing notification, and in a week's time, refund came. So we've seen this journey over last 15, 20 years, as Sanjay ji mentioned.
I wanted to build on that. I mean, you talked about the burning platform for change. Unless there's a big problem where the department is kind of crumbling under, nobody want to look at such a big change. But what was the vision for change that time? Did anybody envision the future, saying that what Amey just described, that the return should be processed like one day and refund should come in like 5 weeks time? Was this envisioned at the time?
It was envisioned. It was foreseen that number of tax returns will rise because Indian economy was growing, and we expected that nearly 7.5 crore returns would come in next 5 to 10 years. So there was no way the income tax department could go in the old way and do it. And there was a need to process these returns. Internally, there was a target of 6 months to issue a refund. And those 6 months target also used to get breached. So there was definitely a desire to bring this down to 30 days. Initial target was 30 days. Though there was a desire and ambition that we'll bring it down to 1 day, and I'm told that many income tax returns are processed within the same day, and many people receive their refund on the same day itself. So we have covered that journey.
Amazing.
It's interesting because the common thing is, if your input is, if your work required to be done is going to grow by 3 times, the standard response is my headcount has to increase by 3 times, right? And we see a lot of that conversation with the judiciary, where the number of judges increase. Oh, cases are increasing, we need to increase the number of judges, which is not to say that there is a shortage of judges, but alternative means of achieving efficiency.
I mean, there is a shortage of judges,
There is a
but that's not the only.
That's not the only thing, right? I'm keen to keep drawing these parallels with your permission. And digitization is so important as the first step, and the judiciary has recognized it and has made much of an effort towards in that direction. But record retention is more than just hardware, right? So if I could just get your thoughts on.
From the beginning, record management was an important pillar of CPC setup. If you recall, in those days, there were two means of filing a return: paper return and e-file return. E-file returns were restricted to corporates in the beginning, so majority of the returns were paper return. These were filed at various IT locations, more than 550 all over the country, and then taken to the income tax offices for processing it, issue of refund. Once CPC was being set up, obviously this solution won't work. So initial thought process was we'll set up 4 processing centers in 4 parts of the country and take returns there. I can share the experiences of Bangalore CPC because ultimately that's the one which survived this entire exercise. So these returns, there was 3-fold steps. First was receipt of these returns at a centralized location, then digitizing them and working on the image, even for doing data entry. For digitization, a scanning platform was built in. I'd seen this in Singapore many years back. They had a conveyor belt where every income tax return was, every bit of paper that was received was scanned, and the officer used to work on the image. This experience was also useful here. Second thing was use of barcode scanners for capturing data, then doing metadata entry to retrain basic data. And most importantly, working with a technology partner. In those days it was Infosys, it still continues, and they had partnered with a company called Iron Mountain for storing them in an off-site location. So we built a post office. The entire logistic solution was end-to-end. So we provided a post office address, post box number 100, Bangalore. From anywhere in the world, you could send a paper return there, or ITRV for e-file returns. And these will be taken to the post office. They are using barcode scanners. These could be scanned. The image would be again captured with the help of proper scanners, high-speed scanners, and the paper would be taken out from the post office or the space itself, holding area, right to the storage office. So you may recall discussion with judiciary. There's a lot of concern about retrieval of this document. People are always concerned, when I need that paper, that order, how do I get it? So a contract was built in that there will be different timelines when what is the urgency of getting that paper. Normally within 24 hours they can get it. But in case you need it on 2 hours notice, there would be special rates. So there was a contract, a protocol built in. So logistics should form a backbone of any exercise which involves paper. So it was a major, any bit of paper which is received in CPC is scanned, and from there it doesn't move up the floor. So it's entirely a paperless office. And if you go to any income tax office now, I think a mayor may recall, may have visited them, there is less paper. I at least have always kept my table free of any paper. Then use of images was an important part of this journey.
I just like to add, I was reading the CNAG's report on CPC somewhere in 2015-16, and there was actually an observation from CNAG that CPC is storing more than what is originally envisaged. There is actually a observation, and thankfully, gladly, ministry gave a strong rebuttal saying that there is a use of this data in the long term and why it makes sense. And I'm really glad 10 years from then, now today, we speak about data as oil, and all of that data in a structured way is stored. And today, you see many of the tax policy decisions are based on actual simulation where you have that data even at a granular level. So,
Yeah, it's a segue to what point I wanted to make. Good leaders have strategy and a vision, but the great leaders focus on logistics. Ultimately, how it gets done
Exactly.
is so important to the success of a project, and I think we're seeing that in the CPC example. I want to just jog your memory. Uh, what were the early days of adoption of this CPC? Did it entail a big change of working style for chartered accountants like you? Was it stressful?
yes, so any change is not easy. I'm sure building CPC was a big change and for officers, but equally or more change also happened in the way the professionals deal with the income tax department and how professional CAs deal with their clients, because now the ability to put a paper or a replacement of a paper later just went
Sure.
away, right? Because now there is a structure, number one. Number two, earlier I could just prepare a thick box file of 500 papers in any sequence and I would just have to go and file it. Now with the CPC and the e-filed return, it had to be go in a particular structure with a pinpointed data. And that was a big change even for traditional CAs. I did sort of face that to even among the professional friends. And that did cause an initial level of frustration, criticism. Of course, any system again is not perfect on day one, right? And there were technical glitches as it happens in any new system. I mean, even a famous e-commerce sites break down on a on a given day. So there was a big change. Also, I must say that within professionals also, the adoption to the technology and the curve is not consistent. There are CAs who barely had computers, may not be a good internet, and so on and so forth. So professionals did have to undergo a change management, as in management terms we call it, and that was not easy.
Not easy. I remember there were some errors that were thrown out in the early days, and I mean there was when we had to report to the people, it was like, oh, this is not going to work. Let's make sure our physical filing is accurate as a backup. But like how you rightly pointed out, there is a learning curve for everyone, including the people who are building the system, right?
The users,
The users,
the intermediaries.
intermediaries, and the institutions. So, Neelesh, your thoughts on how generally such transitions could be managed with special.
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of principles in that happen in any transformation. As we talked about, that there is a burning platform for change required. There is a which gets people excited to do something about it.
Right.
Otherwise, there is inertia. Nobody wants to change. The vision has to be super attractive. It has to be appealing, where people can feel that this will change their life fundamentally. That my life as for example, I'm sure the income tax department felt that their life could of course change way better, because otherwise they were not able to do anything else. But similarly, the users, the individuals, the chartered accountants, they should also feel like that. And likewise, if you take the judicial system, here the ordinary citizen should feel that their life would change for the better. But more importantly, what happens to the lawyers? There has to be something in it for the lawyers as well. They should also feel that their life is going to become better in some way.
Right.
Otherwise, they are not going to buy into the change.
Correct.
The judges have to feel that their life is going to become better. So I think the government has to feel that their life is going to become better. So unless everybody feels that there is something positive for them, that constituency you can expect an opposition from. So that's a very, very important principle of change management.
I'd like to just come in at that point. Right from the inception, customer service was to be focus of CPC. Because customer as a consumer, you use the word consumer, we use the word taxpayer. Taxpayer services were not very much prominent in legal jargon those days. But if you realize now, a taxpayer requires information. He needs status updates. He should be able to track his return which he filed, status of his tax payment. All this was built in. Initial days, we started sending an acknowledgement for the ITRV by email as well as SMS. Those who don't have email, you could have an SMS. We started sending printed versions of acknowledgement as well as by email, just to build in comfort. And I remember in the initial days, each acknowledgement used to be signed as on behalf of CPC by Sanjai Verma, just to give confidence to people. People are not sure that it's a valid thing from Income Tax Department. We introduced digital signing of documents. So digital signing of document made it very easy for people to upload those returns. But setting up a call center, an IVR line, and providing updates by email. I'd also add to the issue about chartered accountants having concern. I remember going out, holding seminars all over the country and guiding, helping, answering queries, because people had doubts. How will the system work? How will machine interpret law? How will there be two interpretations of the same thing? So there were various this thing. So we went out, we addressed these concerns, and even now CPC regularly conducts webinars on a regular basis for large population of taxpayers and those who are there, to guide them. How do you file your return? Particularly, let's say if you have to upload an exemption return, ITR 7, how do you go ahead and do it? So those kind of stuff.
So, you created a SPV within the income tax department, right? It was a new organization to catering to one function.
So we had done a BPR exercise before this. That was important, to identify legal provisions, processes, and rules which are not amenable to machine processing. So these processes were identified. We had done workshops, tried to build consensus, and then go ahead with building up CPC. And we learned on the go also, on the fly, as we went ahead. But there was an effort to build consensus, talk to all the associations, unions, what you call unions, and get them involved. Fortunately, the location of the center being in Bangalore, South has its own advantages. So people were already exposed to working on machines, so there was not so much resistance as such. But to process all the returns in a centralized location and then handle it by a small team of 35 people and handle all India returns was a challenge. There were many conversations, and success has its own, advantages. As we moved ahead, we started processing 1 lakh returns a day, 1.5 lakh returns a day. So people got convinced, and ultimately taxpayers were the beneficiaries. Once they started receiving the refund, they received within 3 months, 4 months. So they also built in success stories, built in pressure on the department.
Were there any strikes?
No, there were no strikes.
There were no strikes. Nothing so extreme.
No.
It was more of, why are we doing this?
Discussions on that. How would it affect the career progression of people, as I mentioned. So this was to be a very small team which will take over this entire work, obviously in collaboration. And a lot of discussion took internally. We built in portals for income tax officers to communicate with the CPC, internal communication. There were platforms created, there were exercises, there were workshops. We went in exercise of uploading the entire arrear demand data, which involved having close collaboration with income tax officers all over. So now there was two. Okay, so both these things work together.
Can I just take a little bit on that one, probe a little bit on that one? It's a very important principle at play here. When you're trying to simplify a process, there is always a question of, are you losing control? Okay, in the search of efficiency. And that's why it requires analysis of the process to find out what are those non-value adding activities. So all the activities that you described earlier, the receipt of the form, scanning of the form, uploading of the form, this does not require an income tax officer's application of mind.
It's not sovereign function.
It's a clerical administrative work which actually does not add any value beyond adding delay.
Correct.
So I think I'm sure you must have segregated where is the judgment and decision making required, and use the time of the officers only for those, and for all other activities either digitize them, automate them, and perhaps even eliminate some of them.
I entirely agree with you. We divided all the functions into core functions and non-core functions. What you mentioned, that sovereign functions, tax collection, compliance, and other things. These are non-core activities. These could be done in a back office environment easily, processing a return, receipt, logistics, customer service. So we divided them, and the concept was that most of the income tax returns will be processed in a batch mode, based on Oracle Rules Engine platform, so that when there is a deviation from the standard mandate, only at that stage an income tax officer would look at it. So exception handling was to be the role of income tax officer. It's akin to something the passport seva kendra,
Yes.
where the ultimate approval is given. So all the strategic controls were always with the income tax department, while the non-core functions, as you mentioned, these are low-end activities, were outsourced in a end-to-end control model with a service provider.
And did you eliminate some processes in
We
this?
did
one?
eliminate.
And-
If you recall the discussion about full day filing of return, that entire return filing exercise itself became redundant. With e-filing, you don't have MELAs, you don't have a process where a return form is received, entered in a manual register, given a number, then that number is tracked. That entire process went away. Many other processes could be identified which were not redundant. The logistic platform itself became entirely end-to-end computerized.
So on the business process reengineering, I want to get Ameya's views from a legal perspective. But just before that, Neelesh, business process reengineering as fundamental and the first step before you do any digitization, right? So your experience across sectors.
So I mean, you have to start with the process mapping.
Mapping.
Literally, you have to start with the first step and think of yourself as, in this case, if you have to think that you are the return, and if you are the return, then what happens to you? Where do you go from the consumer's, let's say, desk or the taxpayer's desk? What happens? You kind of imagine what that process goes. You document that process. You find out all of those things which are non-value added. We also measure things called a takt time. But the takt time and the waiting time.
Right.
If all activities were done immediately without any waiting, what is the minimum amount of time that process would take? Okay, and you'll be surprised that in most processes, 90% of the time is waiting time. So whether it's in this case, if you take the form for the income tax return, for an officer to apply their mind and take a view on it and clear it, reject it, whatever, that would be a fraction of the whole. I mean, if it is taking 12 months, it would probably not more than like 5 minutes. Okay. Similarly, in the case for if you take the extension of our judicial reforms, if we see the time where the case is actually being discussed either in the court or somebody is doing something on it, that's a fraction of the time.
Of the length of the case.
In that case, I think 99% of the time is waiting time. And the efficiency lies in not trying to optimize that 1%.
Correct.
You remove that 99%. If that 99% can be reduced or that 90% can be reduced, that is where the efficiency really comes from, and that does not change the outcome in any way. Okay. So
correct.
That is generally the principle which is so heartening to see how they use it.
Correct. So Mia, you any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would like to just mention something about that. Annexure-less returns were introduced. So the process about improvement in the process. Earlier, an income tax return used to have all the TDS certificate, challans, and the work of removing the staples and removing all the challans used to take a lot of time. You mentioned about redundant thing, and there would be probably need for one person once a year to look at some of those certificates and challans. But there was redundant work, so the entire exercise made it easier for a taxpayer. The exercise you mentioned about going to a mela with a thick book. So there was no need. So the processes underwent a dynamic change because the prior activities had been done. On the legal side, a lot of changes were made. For example, to make digital signature a valid signature, service of notice by email, changes were made to Section 282 of Income Tax Act. Section 143(1) was amended to enable machine processing, And by delegated legislation, CBDT brought out a scheme of centralized processing of income tax return scheme, where the entire scheme is laid out. It also includes putting a email notice or a communication in the email box of the taxpayer on the website is sufficient deemed notice. These were new things because Indian Evidence Act has different interpretations. So we are working within the legal framework. As we evolved, these challenges had to be met. And now it's accepted that you can get a communication by email. But initial days we went with both paper as well as email communication. So these challenges were met as we went ahead.
Most of our laws and some of these systems or institutions were created at a time when there was no concept of technology. Okay, so everything was geographically controlled and that's why he also talked about that initially it was thought of as Bangalore and Goa. But when you can do everything centrally, when we are in India, we are doing is a back office hub for the whole world. Okay, why can't we do all the things inside India at one place? So, but that requires a change in mindset, and particularly in such kind of situations, it requires a change in regulation. And you touched upon some of them. For example, even the using electronic evidence, and we discussed that in the context of judicial reforms. That why can't the same principle be applied in the judiciary, where a notice can be served by email? But some of these, were there any other structural changes that were also required in terms of authority? They're moving from a geographical structure to a centralized structure, because that normally is very complicated.
Yes. So as you mentioned, this was to be a jurisdiction-free environment. Initially, each income taxpayer was mapped to an income tax officer.
Yes.
So the entire income tax department had evolved over those principles.
Yes.
So once you do centralized processing of return, that entails a jurisdiction-free centralized processing of return. The scheme itself said that it formulated that CPC will have all India jurisdiction in respect of all the returns filed in the country, whether it's e-filed returns to begin with, and over a period of time, paper returns could also be received at various locations and sent across to CPC. So jurisdiction-free centralized processing using rules engine, not a discretion-based kind of processing which used to happen earlier. So those were some challenges. Those were some of the measures which were
That's
taken.
amazing. So in the context of courts, I think this because again for the police station, for example, everything is their jurisdiction, right? And you go outside the boundary of the police station, you are like another. So you
Nobody to us.
Yeah. So and similarly, every high court has its own independence.
Correct.
So I think therefore trying to create a centralized system in a system which was conceptualized as a geographically system, I think is one of the biggest change management challenges.
The more I think about it, the back office concept is just amazing. How it. I mean, you were making a point.
Yeah, I just want to again continue the thread. Again, here the inherent jurisdiction of the officer in charge of my file was protected and was respected.
Yeah.
The 90% process part anyway was not relevant to the decision making by that officer.
Yes.
So the point that you earlier made, checking the arithmetical accuracy, for example, system gives you comfort. But I think all tax officers also wanted to protect their sort of powers and which are under the law. Law was not amended to that effect.
Right.
Right. So if I'm a jurisdiction Mumbai, then you have to take my approval for any action. So what CPC did was that it created this beautiful backend work and presented it to the officer to make a decision rather than everyone doing everything.
So they actually empowered that officer without taking away anything from them.
That's right. And that is where in the context of, say, judiciary, for example, perhaps this parallel could possibly be drawn that the key part can happen at one place. Sorry, yeah.
I have another view on this. I mean, it was not to protect the powers of income tax officer. It was more focused at the taxpayer. I'm a taxpayer based in Bangalore. I should have access to an income tax office in case I have a location. I should be able to walk across to an income tax office, not for these routine arithmetical kind of calculations. I have some back taxes to pay. I've received a notice. I need a clearance certificate. So it was always envisaged that for day-to-day function, the routine level function will be outsourced. But the core strategic work will be always with the income tax. It was not to protect, it was also to provide a sense of continuity. And while scrutiny now, if you see, is done in a faceless manner. It could be done anywhere. But your return is mapped to a particular officer or the location. The numbers have shrunk, but there is always mapping. The idea is comfort to be provided to a senior citizen or anybody to walk into an income tax office and get it. And it will be usually in the place where you stay or where you have got a time allotted or where you have a place of work, or place of business. So it was more looking at the taxpayer experience.
So
just
fresh
a
perspective.
another
Because I think that the reason why CPC has been a success is also because it didn't try to do too much. It didn't try to transform the income tax department by itself. It said this is most important. Let's try and change this, and this will lead to consequential changes. We're seeing some of those in terms of data for policy making, business intelligence, or now faceless assessment, which we are all learning how it will play out. But so just possibly at the end of our conversation, so an important decision that was taken very early on was the structure of the team. This is from what I understand from our earlier, the structure of the team, and to bring in partners, technology partners or other partners, what in normal business partner parlance would be vendors. You made a very conscious decision. The income tax department, CPC, made a very conscious decision to bring on board very early, by recognizing that some of these tasks which Neelesh mentioned are not your areas of expertise. Like servers configuration is not your headache, is not your just that being aware of your own limitations is such a self-aware and wise thing. How did that happen, and how did you go about deciding that you need to take the help, and how did you make the decision on whose help to take?
Surya, I would like to answer that in a slightly historical perspective. Income tax department was one of the early movers in technology space. We had begun our computerization early by setting up 36 regional computer centers and allotting PAN numbers and TAN numbers to people. Over this process, and e-filing and others process had been introduced, we had realized we are following a procurement model, which is in government. You try and procure servers, you try and procure services, then you try and marry both of them. So one was that we were not experts at it. We were never the experts in sizing of servers. Another problem was the way government rules work. By the time you get approval for a server or any bit of hardware, that technology has already become obsolete, and or more or less the server has become out of service, out of life. So we consulted with experts. We formed a core group of technology experts from CIOs of various companies who advised us at various places, and they told us that instead of getting into this procurement model and trying to do everything yourself, it would be better to outsource the entire job on end-to-end, what we call a MSP model. So that
what is MSP, sir?
MSP is this thing. Sorry,
I think it's managed service
provider. Managed service provider is the MSP model, where a technology partner will bring in qualities and experiences which are central to their existence, while we bring in domain knowledge and our sovereign function guidance, and bring them together so that the technology partner will decide. We give him a task. You have to process, let's say, 1 lakh returns in a day. So when he has to do his calculation at the back of the envelope, what is the service sizing, what is the number of manpower, what is the hardware required, and how soon it needs to be changed. So the department protects itself from these things, and financially also it is an incentive for the person to process returns past their incentives, and their SLAs by way of penalties and other things if you don't process it. So we decided we'll move away from procurement to end-to-end solution with the MSP partner. In this case, Infosys Technologies won the contract, and they were L1 partners in 2009. They were signed the contract, and they continue with us for 15 years. And here I would like to place on record my deep appreciation and department's appreciation. So Infosys has done a very great amount of work over these 15 years. They provided a lot of inputs, a lot of resources, and they were real partners in the sense this public-private partnership was new to both Income Tax Department and Infosys. We learned on the way, we enriched each other. It was a good learning experience, and a lot of credit must go to Infosys for building this transformation exercise.
This software as a service, or paying for an outcome, is a very big change in thinking, and I'm glad the department thought about it, because ultimately what you want a return processed. That the core objective of this whole thing is a return should be processed in the minimum fastest amount of time. The record should be kept, okay, and available and accessible at any point in time, right? So if you decide that as the outcome, you say this is what I want, for which I will pay you a certain amount of money per return or per paper. I don't know how it
Per
works.
return,
Per return.
processing of per return.
Processing per return. And then let them figure out what resources they need.
I think there are various levels of this managed service provider model, and for the judiciary, while completely outsourcing transactional work, maybe we'll have to explore it. At least the technology component of it or the infrastructure component of it can definitely be thought of, and
Record management.
record management, retention,
Logistics and record management could be central. Because judiciary has a lot of records, and I mentioned about it. So that's a prime area which could be.
the courts of record, the original keepers of
Record would still be kept. They won't be at the judicial premises.
that's all.
Somewhere else.
Under their control, but somewhere else.
Correct. So, just to kind of before I give you all a chance for the final closing remarks, or I think the advantage that the income tax department had, that it was unified across the country, and there was a recognition of the problem. But in many situations, while there is recognition of the problem, there are searching for means to solve the problem. What we have hoped to do through this conversation is to show how income tax department has solved it through the CPC model. Having a vision, having a plan of action, having a core team that is committed to the cause, being aware of limitations very early on in the process, very, very intensive stakeholder engagement, both internal and with the ecosystem. All of these, I think, have helped the CPC bring in a very lasting institutional change, and I'm hoping that the judiciary will also do something similar and derive lessons relevant to it. It has its own challenges. It's not just one party. There are two parties and sometimes multiple parties, so there are conflicting records that need to be brought on record. So there are nuances, there are variations which are unique to the judicial processes that need to be one needs to be mindful of. But I'm hoping that this will lead to those sort of conversations in the days ahead. Any final comments starting from?
Sure. So, two, three points. CPC as an approach, if you read on social media today, you will still see some criticism on, look, I have this problem. But if on an aggregate basis, if you see, these are usually the corner cases. And the moment we speak of any change, we always would try to point out these corner cases, which are a deviation. And I think how much ever do, and especially a country as complex as India and tax law being even more complex, there are like 100 rates possibly on any income. We will not be able to deal with all the corner cases, and I think that apprehension perhaps can be addressed in the context of, say, judiciary by saying that can we solve 90% problem at least. So that was one. Second, I think technology, once the stack is ready, you can build a lot of things on it. And I'll give two examples. One is, even within professionals and corporates, because you have the entire digital filing, people created in between softwares which pulls the data from my ERP, get it into the software system, and then it goes into the income tax utility. So a lot of innovation happened in between that process as well, and all of that was facilitated because CPC framework was there. So I think that innovation is also powerful. We have seen it in the context of GST, for example, as well, where you have these engines in between which bring a lot of efficiency. And the third and the last comment is that as we speak, there's a public consultation going on a new income tax bill. The whole theme of the new income tax bill is to simplify, And you will see, this is my take, the whole process-driven action from the CPC gets reflected in the way I'm writing the law. Instead of writing a long English, now I am saying that, you calculate the capital gain by A plus B minus C, because that A plus B minus C will help me put together a logic in the CPC process as well.
The rules engine.
Because in the last 1 month, whatever consultations, discussions I have had, there has been a person from CPC also attending and listening it, because whatever you write in a new law has to be put into the rule engine. So the new law is getting the inspiration, or the CPC is now part of the law making itself, which again is a big change.
Correct. Thank you for that point, the last one about the rules engine, and also the digital public infrastructure aspect of the income tax utility. I think that's a point I should have made. I thank you for bringing that. Neelesh, your final comments before I come to you.
So I still wanted to hear one more thing from Sanjay, which is about where did they encounter resistance in this whole process? From which constituencies? Did they encounter resistance from chartered accountants? Did they encounter resistance from users? Did they encounter resistance from officers within the department, various constituencies of that? And how was that handled? How were their needs addressed? I think that's a very important element of the transformation.
So, Neelesh, I would like to answer that. Contrary to public view, there was not so much resistance, because each segment, each stakeholder was looking out for reforms. They were looking for better expectations. There was more skepticism and kind of doubts whether the exercise
will work,
whether law can be converted into a machine readable mode where different interpretations can be handled. So I don't think we had conversation. Challenges were more inside within us, trying to transform the department, trying to convert a paper return into data, moving from images to OCR to a data entry platform. Those kind of challenges were there initially. Testing of rules and testing of Income Tax Act, creating scenarios, and continuous conversation with all stakeholders. There were not so many challenges because we had early successes, and each success creates its own champions.
Right.
So I would like to just also say a few things in continuation what Amey was saying, that now that formulae are being put in the Income Tax Act, would you have imagined this some 15 years ago? Law undergoes a change because of the technology innovation. So in the judicial context, I know Neelesh would like to say something. I would like to mention just 2 or 3 things which could be useful from CPC experience. One is a BPR exercise. Another would be a pilot project. It could be tried out in a smaller state or a smaller location, and they should be change champions. We have the benefit of finance ministers down to CBDT to everybody else being involved right from the beginning, and change champions can create a very good environment for creating a top-down approach, if you may like to use the word. So people must have faith in the system, and they must have belief that this can be done. And since you mentioned GST, a GST council kind of experience sharing with states and center with eminent jurists, ex-law ministers, others who could be part of the platform, ex-judges, would help judiciary probably move in that direction. I think desire is there within the judicial system itself for this reform. But how to go about doing it, so the learnings both from CPC, GST and other such initiatives, that success is possible, maybe a small pilot project. And change champions is one thing I would like to be.
I think those are great points. There's one theory in change management that they say that you need top down and bottom up both. So you need people from the top who are driving it, and you need people from the bottom who actually support it because their personal interests are aligned with it. So I think that is super important. I think when it comes to just linking back to the judicial reforms, the complexity there is also on account of is quite high, and also on account of a couple of different things. Here, the whole organization was at least one central organization across the country. Here, every high court is an independent body with an independent jurisdiction. So it is you are dealing with every high court as one entity. So that I think it makes it it's like almost dealing with trying to do the same thing, let's say, in every state. It's that level of complexity. But the one inspiration that I get from this is the whole case management part of it. If we take that process, handling the case files and the documents from the time the case is filed and all the records, managing that end to end, even if that process can be digitized, I think it will be a big make a big difference. And that is something that I think everybody should be seeing value in. That is something that there are parallels that can be drawn from other areas. So that probably is a good first area to think of as a pilot. And I agree with them.
I could just add to it, a visit to CPC Bangalore would be useful for many people to see how the system works, at least the logistics side of it. Use of a a high-speed printer, Pitney Bowes machine, how it mails, how it prints, folds, and puts it in an envelope without anybody touching it. That can be visually, a very good experience for people to realize. No, it's not touched. Any income tax return form is not touched by any income tax officer. The entire communication system, the entire process, and record management and retrieval. It could be a good learning experience. You could organize a visit at the highest level.
Thank you, Sanjay ji, Neelesh, Ameya, for that insightful conversation. You've been listening to the DAKSH podcast. To find out more about us and our work, please visit our website dakshindia.org. That's DAKSH India.org. You'll also find material about the Pathways to Digital Courts initiative on this website. Don't forget to tag us, follow us, do share your feedback, talk about it in social media, share the episode. A special thanks to Vinay Kumar at Berito and Aniket Jagtap and the team at WeWork. Also, my colleagues Smita and Harshita at DAKSH. Thank you for listening.